So I had multiple requests to create this channel setting in a more zoomed up view. So in this video, I'm going to do exactly that for you guys. The materials that I'll be using for this project is 4 pieces of 21 gauge square wire, along with 3mm faceted stones. I'll be using needle nose pliers and 28 gauge round wire as well. So I'm going to create a diagram for you guys to show you how the facet sits in this set of wires and how I secure them in place using the 28 gauge round. So first I'm showing you kind of how the facet sits in. Essentially, when you have your 4 pieces of square wire, the 2 top pieces are going to hold the cut edge of the top of the facet, and the 2 bottom square wires are going to be where the point of the facet rests. The purple pen is going to illustrate the 28 gauge round wire. I want the round wire to start by pulling away from me. Then I'm going to start in a figure 8 pattern around the sets of wire. I would go back and study this portion of the video a few times before moving forward, just to understand how the flow of wire works and you creating a figure 8 pattern. This will make more sense once we move forward in the video, but again, I'm going to start with the wire pulling away from me, and then I'm going to go into my figure 8 pattern on both sets of wire. The reason that we're also doing a figure 8 pattern this way is it's creating a X at the very bottom channel. Essentially, this is where the point of the facet sits. So by creating a wire channel, I am now holding that in place. So starting on this wrap, we're going to take our square wires, and with our 28 gauge round wire starting underneath the square wires, we're going to wrap over and under, essentially in a clockwise rotation. I'm going to wrap a few times around my square wire because this is 28 gauge round wire that I'm using, and because it's thin, I want it to hold my square wires tightly in place. So the way to do that is to wrap a few times more than I usually would with a thicker wire. After we've wrapped the top a few times, what we're going to do is take the inner 2 sets of wire and we're going to create a 90-degree bend. What we're doing right now is going to be the beginning of how we're going to create the bottom seat for the faceted stone. So with the inner 2 wires, what I'm going to do is push them down, and then I'm going to take my set of pliers and I'm going to bend them back straight parallel with the top 2 set of wires at about 1/8 of an inch. What I'm doing right now is essentially separating the bottom set of wire into a V shape, which is going to allow the point of the facet to sit in between, and then I'm going to take my set of pliers, pinch about 1/8 of the metal up, and then have it parallel with the set of wires that are resting on top. Again, by doing this, now I'm going to be creating the bottom portion of the channel where the point of the facet is going to sit into place. Once I have all 4 of my wires parallel to each other again, now I need to get my 28 gauge round wire to the bottom left wire, and I need that wire to be underneath, pulling away from me. So what I'm going to do now is essentially manipulate the round wire that I have on top by wrapping on the right side of the wire first and then pulling it to the left, wrapping it around the left wire, which is going to allow me to have the wire at the end pulling away from me, which is exactly what I want to start this project. Here's me demonstrating that pattern for you guys right now. Now that we have the wire pulling away from us, let's just do a practice figure 8 pattern on both sides. With the wire starting away from us, we're going to pull it inside the 2 sets of wires around the left wire and then pulling it to the right, allowing it to go underneath the bottom right wire, which is then going to start the next figure 8. Going through the center of both pairs of wire, around the right top wire, through the pair of wires on the right in the center, which is going to leave the wire pulling away from us, going to the left. We're going to go straight into our next figure 8, and then after the left, we're going to pull it to the right. After pulling it to the right, again, we're going to go underneath the bottom right wire, through the center of both pairs of right wires, which is going to leave the 28 gauge on top, pulling it over the right top wire, and then bringing the 28 round back through the center, around the bottom left wire, and then creating your first loop to tie off the wire. You don't have to do 2 figure 8s on both sides. You can do 1 figure 8 if you want. I personally like the style of doing 2 figure 8s. It also allows me to secure that stone and wrap in place. So now let's go ahead and add a stone into this channel setting. Now that we've done a practice round of figure 8s, now let's go ahead, set a stone, and set that into place. Again, starting with that wire pulling away from us, it's going to wrap around the top left. You're going to pull it through both pairs of wires, pulling it around the bottom right, through the pair of wires on the right to go up and around the top right wire, and then pulling it through the sets of wires on the right, back to the left, into your next figure 8 straight away. When creating this figure 8 pattern on both sides, not only is it meeting in the center at the bottom of the pairs of wire at the point of the facet, which is going to hold that in place, but it's also creating a wrap around the top portion of the wire, which is where the top portion of the stone sets in place, allowing for a snug fit on both the top and the bottom of your facet stone. Once you complete a figure 8 pattern on both sides of the wire, holding your faceted stone in place, you're going to create a single wrap around the bottom left wire, which is going to tie off the pattern that you just created, which is going to allow for a firm connection on that wire and to not allow it to unravel during your next wrap. After you've tied off your 28 gauge round wire, this is what your piece should look like at the end. Let's go ahead and set another stone. I'm starting with my piece upside down because I like how the flat side of the facet sits on my finger, allowing me to slide it between the pairs of wire. You're noticing this example, the stone gave me a small bit of trouble, but that was alright. I essentially just pushed it with my thumb and it popped right into place. Remember, for the most part, that the wire that you're using has a little bit of flex to it, so don't be nervous if your stone isn't setting on the first attempt, or if you just have to finesse your wire to set on top of the stone and underneath your stone. There's also an added benefit to this figure 8 pattern, which is tightening the pairs of wire together. And by that I mean, when you create a figure 8 pattern on the top and bottom pairs of wire, you're pulling them together. And then when you're pulling your round wire from the top left to the bottom right, or vice versa, the top right to the bottom left, now you're pulling those wires inward. So you're creating a very tight square formation when you're doing this figure 8 pattern. Something that I like to do as well after creating the pattern on both sides is use my finger or a tool and push all the wire together. I want the wire as tight as possible all the time. Yes, that can be a catch-22 because if you're using thin wire and you're pulling really hard, you're going to snap your wire. But for the rule of thumb, you want your wire and your piece to be as tight as possible. You don't want any air to be breathing through, allowing for separation of your wire or your stones to fall out. As I mentioned before, you can push your stone through the top pairs of wire or through the bottom pairs of wire. It's completely up to you. And remember, if there's a little space between the wire and your stone, you're working with wire, so just push it onto the stone. A practice that I like using is squeezing the pairs of wire together on the stone as I'm using my 28 gauge round wire to wrap around the square wires. That's going to allow me the ability to hold the stone in place and not worry that there's space between the wire and the stone, because I know there's not, because I'm pushing the wire onto the stone. Once you practice this figure 8 pattern a few times, you'll realize that there's a flow with it, and you're going to move through this pattern so fast. I promise you that. I hope this zoomed up tutorial of this specific style of channel setting helped you guys out. If it did, consider dropping a like and subscribing. I appreciate all the support. There's so many different styles and patterns of setting stones, and currently I'm on a tutorial binge of channel setting. So next week I'm going to discuss another style of channel setting that I do. This one is a unique pattern that I personally like because of the twists and bends. Thanks for watching, guys. Until next time, keep on rapping.